Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, and I'll be your host. On today's bonus episode, we're going to do a document deep dive on scope documents. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, it really helps us if you like, subscribe, or share this episode or any episode that you found valuable with a friend or coworker who you think might appreciate it. At Project Command, we're committed to helping fire departments deliver better projects. And if you've got a question or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either by email or on air in a future episode. So please help us spread the word and keep the mission moving forward. So guys, today what I'm going to do is a deep dive on project scopes. And we're going to do more of these document deep dives throughout this podcast series. And what I want to do is just give you a shorter episode which focuses specifically on one document in project management. And we're going to only focus on the important ones, the ones you really need to know about. And if you guys have stuff that you want us to cover, documents you want to know more about, of course, you can email us at Project Command Podcast and we'll talk about them. But I want to start with on our bonus document deep dive series. I want to start with the project scope because of how critical it is and because it's the thing I get the most questions about, or the document I get the most questions about, I should say. So that's what we're going to do for our first episode. So let's start off with the absolute basics. What is a scope document? Well, a scope document is a way that you can, in a very concise manner, so 1 page, 2 pages at the absolute most, articulate what specifically your project aims to accomplish. And we'll talk about how much detail you need to have in your scope document, but the thing I want you to understand right at the outset here is that the scope is, think about like, you have a hunting rifle and you're looking through the scope and it shows you exactly what you're trying to shoot, exactly where on that deer that bullet is going to go, hopefully. That's what the scope does. It says, okay, this is what the project aims to accomplish. And sometimes you know that right out of the gate, like you'll get a specific project and the objectives of it will be very, very clear. And sometimes less so. Sometimes you just get a broad, fix this, or, develop a process for this, or, roll this thing out to the operations section. And it's now your responsibility as a project manager to dial in and figure out what exactly does that entail. Like if we were to jump to the end of the project, what would need to have been accomplished for us to consider this a successful project? And the way to do that is with project requirements. Now, if the project scope says exactly what we need to get done, the project requirements are all of the individual details that make up that work. So it's really important when we put a scope together that we collect all the requirements from our project sponsor, that's the person who authorized the work, to our stakeholders, that's the people with skin in the game, and our project team. We need to collect from all of them the individual requirements of the work that we're trying to do. And we want to get pretty granular with these requirements. You really want to get specifics that you want to get done. So, for example, when we did our Bluetooth project, which was a project we did last year to deploy Bluetooth to all of our SCBAs and radios. So in the process of building that scope, we collected a bunch of requirements. So I'm just going to read off a few of them here just so you can get a sense for what kinds of things we want to capture with the requirements. Okay, so remember with these requirements, we could just put it together a basic table with columns. And one of the columns is going to be requirement name. Another would be requirement description. Another is added by, so that if you have questions about it, you know who put it on there. Date added, and the the last one that I would put is the importance of the requirement. So is this low, medium, high, critical? Okay, so a couple of examples. For the Bluetooth project, one of them was training. That's the requirement name. So for the name, you write training. The description, develop and deliver training for safe Bluetooth use. Okay. And then, added by Peter Eunice, importance critical, etc. Another one, name, SOG development. Description, must develop new SOG governing Bluetooth use. And the last example is name QA, or quality assurance. And the description would be, must include a QA/QI audit after the completion of the project. And so this is just a way for us to verify after we do the project that it, whatever the compliance rate was, let's say we check all of the air packs or we check some percentage of them and we say, okay, compliance was 95%, meaning of all the air packs and radios we checked, 95% were fully compliant with the specifications that our project laid out. Okay, so those are some examples of the specific requirements that you want to collect when you're putting your scope together. And so again, you get everybody together either in a meeting or across shared documents, and you collect these requirements. And this can, happen in that big meeting, or it can happen where you put together that shared document, you send it to everybody, and you set like a 1 or 2 week deadline, and just say, hey guys, let's try to get these requirements mapped out within the next week or two. And, doing both of those can be really powerful. So like get that big meeting with your stakeholders, your project sponsor, your project team in that meeting, and, try to get as much bang for your buck as you can. In that meeting, you collect your requirements and you can collect your risk. So anything that you need to get the group together to collect, good to do in that meeting. So collect your requirements, do some basic risk forecasting, but then say, okay, guys, I'm going to put together that shared document, which is going to have the stuff we've talked about today, but also any requirements you think of, or if you think of any additional stakeholders, send this list to them so they can add them, and then have another like week or two after the fact or after that meeting where you're continuously collecting those requirements that you're going to then use for your scope. Okay. And I think this is probably pretty intuitive, but I just want to say it anyway. The scope is one of the first things that you're going to want to develop for your project. You're going to do it at the beginning of the project. And once you make that scope, once you go through all the effort, you collect all these requirements, you put together your scope, you're going to review that with your project sponsor. And then importantly, you're going to really, really try not to change the scope after you make it. And, it's not to say you never change the scope after you make it, but there wouldn't be much of a point in having a project scope if, regularly throughout the project, you're going in and changing it and adding things. Then there really wouldn't be much of a point in making one to begin with. The point of that scope is to specifically say, this is what we're doing. And that's important so that if you met the objective at the end of the project, but it also helps you say no to things. So, people are going to say, hey, what about this? What about that? And you just say, listen, that's not in the scope. We can't just keep expanding the scope forever and ever. We'll never get the project done. So it's just really, really critical, very critical, in fact, that you protect that scope. Protect that scope. Don't let people add things into it. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about on our document deep dive into scopes is, what should a scope look like? Now, to me, this is kind of a loaded question because I think the answer is it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter specifically what format is in or that it's in. What matters is, does it get the message? Does it get the point across? So what the scope says is a lot more important than how it looks. So to be clear, there's a bunch of ways you can set up a scope document. You can have, just a Word document with a bunch of different categories. It could say in scope, out of scope, descriptions of the project, an executive summary. You can make it this great big fancy thing, or not. And I prefer the or not option. I don't think that, just with anything in project management, the more simple you can keep it, the better it is. And the better it is for the people that are reading it. So if someone looks at your scope and it's this great big elaborate thing, yeah, they might read through it all, but the likelihood is that they're probably not going to, especially when people see really long documents, they tend to just skip through them. So with your scope, I personally really like having imagine a table, like a Microsoft Word table, and you have essentially two columns, in scope and out of scope. And in scope, you're going to list all the things you're doing. And you would say, so like for our Bluetooth project, you would say, we'll develop and deliver training to be deployed or to be delivered across the entire fire department. We'll author and deploy a new SOG governing Bluetooth use. In scope would also be this, project encompasses every fire station and every unit in the fire department. This project will include a QA, QI audit at the conclusion of the implementation stage to determine project compliance, and on and on. And then in the out of scope column, you'll write things like any reviews for audio quality not pertaining to Bluetooth use, out of scope. Development of new training policies not pertaining to Bluetooth. Training on any emergency communications not related to this project. And so you can see what I'm doing there is listing things that are like similar that you could theoretically see working their way into a project like this, but that are not going to be a part of this project. And so, you'll end up with those two columns, in scope, out of scope, and it's basic, it's easy to look at and understand what the project scope is, and doesn't require a lot of extra work on your end. Now, the way I would think about this is we are avoiding what's called gold plating. Gold plating is a fancy way of saying that you are going to take a document or something that you're doing and you want to make it look really fancy or really professional. And I genuinely do get that. We take a lot of pride in our work as firefighters, and that transfers over to projects. But in this line of work, in the fire department, people are not looking for great big elaborate documents. And in fact, when they see them, they don't want to get involved with it. They don't want to read it. They don't want to, commit to reading something that's 50 pages long. It's War and Peace or whatever. So what you want to do is you want to end up with something that's succinct, concise, and to the point. So I really like those two columns. But again, the important thing for this is there's no real right way to do a scope as long as it includes the critical information of what's in scope and what's out of scope. So experiment, get on ChatGPT and say, hey, give me 3 examples of what a scope document could look like. And then, adjust it, take it and make it your own, customize it for your department. Just make sure it gets done at the beginning of the project. It gets done with a lot of engagement from your stakeholders and your project team. Just make sure that it clearly outlines what is going to be included in this project and things that are not going to be included in this project. And make sure that once you make your scope document, you try really hard not to change or add things to it. And that's it. That's the 101 on project scope documents. That's all the time we have today. This has been a special bonus episode of Project Command. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, please help us out by liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode or any episode that you found valuable with a friend or coworker who you think might appreciate it. At Project Command, we're committed to helping fire departments deliver better projects. And if you've got a question or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either by email or on air in a future episode. So please help us spread the word and keep the mission moving forward.